I think it takes a lot of brass neck from this prime minister to go out on TV and talk about extremism and tolerance. I'll take no moral lectures from a prime minister who has served alongside and even promoted at times the likes of Boris Johnson, who called Muslim women letterboxes and likened them to bank robbers, who has served with Suella Braverman and Lee Anderson, just to name a few. So if the prime minister had any seriousness in wanting to tackle extremism, he doesn't need to look beyond parliament. He needs to look within his own parliamentary party. If he wanted to tackle tolerance, if he really wanted to promote tolerance, he would start by the political leadership that he can show within his own party.
Okay.
I'm extremely concerned at what I thought was a dangerous and at times incoherent speech from the prime minister yesterday that clearly to me was a political maneuver.
Jonathan, I'll start with you. What's your analysis of why Rishi Sunak made the speech, and what was your sort of takeaway from it?
Not any particular policies, but I thought that he was waving a sort of flag and saying, look, there's a point here which is of sufficient national concern that the police in particular need to take some steps about. He didn't say precisely what it was, but it was a sort of, look, there's a sufficient problem here. And I should say that, I mean, when it comes to threats to MPs, I've been inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I think there are threats to MPs and it has had an impact. I mean, there's a broader question about whether or not the protests themselves are threatening democracy, which we can discuss. But I think really he was just saying, I think there's a problem and something needs to be done.
I mean, I think a lot of people will have some sympathy. Well, will have sympathy for that. I think many people are aware that MPs are under a lot of pressure, but also, Jonathan, people will also push back and say, look, people are also very, very driven by what they're seeing from Gaza, and they want to have their right. They feel frustrated. They can't do anything, but going out to protest is something that they feel really strongly about. Where does the line fall between people's rights to protest, and where does that cross into extremism? Because I think that's something that people are sort of pondering.
Yeah, I mean, you use the word extremism, which is really hard. And I'm not going to pretend this is easy. No one has really managed to define what they mean by extremism. I think it's probably easy to think in terms of terrorism, which is the use or threat of serious violence towards people or towards property. And it may be more online than on the streets, but there are, aren't there? There are some threats to kill MPs, to rape female MPs, which do begin to cross into the terrorism world, because the purpose of them seems to be to influence the government or to intimidate MPs. So I think that's probably the line that I would draw, at least when it comes to using terrorism. I mean, there are obviously other questions which are, you know, how much money should the police have to dedicate to policing? Is there a disproportionate impact on Jews who feel or say they feel intimidated to go onto the streets? But those aren't going to be dealt with, I think, through terrorism. That's probably going to be managed under the Public Order Act.
Ali, let's bring you into the conversation. I mean, the Prime Minister was wanting to sort of send a message of calm out and sort of acknowledging this problem. Do you think he achieved that? What was your analysis of what he said?
No, Aisha, I don't think he's achieved that. In fact, I think it takes a lot of brass neck from this prime minister to go out on TV and talk about extremism and tolerance. I'll take no moral lectures from a prime minister who has served alongside and even promoted at times the likes of Boris Johnson, who called Muslim women letterboxes and likened them to bank robbers, who has served with Suella Braverman and Lee Anderson, just to name a few. So if the prime minister had any seriousness in wanting to tackle extremism, he doesn't need to look beyond parliament. He needs to look within his own parliamentary party. If he wanted to tackle tolerance, if he really wanted to promote tolerance, he would start by the political leadership that he can show within his own party.
Okay.
I'm extremely concerned at what I thought was a dangerous and at times incoherent speech from the prime minister yesterday that clearly to me was a political maneuver by a man who knows he is on a clock. He is headed towards an election defeat, and he thought that George Galloway's by-election result would give him an opportunity to go out and look statesmanlike, but he really just looks quite silly.
I mean, it's interesting. We're having a real flood of messages coming in and actually I have to say everybody so far that's messaged in has sort of agrees with that point. A lot of people are saying you can't talk about trying to calm things down and still be there with Braverman, Lee Anderson, Robert Jenrick and others. I mean, if you have a different view, please do message in. If you think Rishi Sunak made a good speech last night, let me know, because I do want to get a range of views. And look, Ali, obviously he made this speech off the back of the Rochdale by-election, a very big win for George Galloway there. George Galloway will arrive in Parliament this week and will certainly shake things up. As chair of the Labour Muslim Network, what was your reaction to Galloway's win, and how much damage do you think all of this is doing to Labour's support within the Muslim community?
Well, look, I have, and I think I have on your program previously spoken at length and warned my colleagues in the Labour Party that we are at a crisis point as it pertains to the Muslim support for the Labour Party and the feeling within the Muslim community that Labour has betrayed us. And so, I think there are some extenuating circumstances in Rochdale, but what Rochdale shows is that what I have been warning about over the last 3 months and even beyond that is coming to pass, and that if you're an MP that's sat in a constituency that has a large Muslim population, like Rochdale, like Bradford, like Birmingham, like East London, I would be seriously concerned that we're losing the trust of these communities. But it's not just an electoral problem, it's a moral problem. These communities, Muslims have felt safe in the Labour Party for decades and decades and generations, and they have looked at what's happened in Gaza and the response to Gaza and the response to Islamophobia within Westminster as well, and no longer feel safe, don't have the same confidence that they had in the Labour Party. I don't think it's a lost cause. I think if we work hard now, if we use this by-election result as a marker, then we can rebuild trust with the Muslim community. But we have to have the political will to do so.
Okay. Just before we bid you farewell, Jonathan, just to bring you back into the conversation, I'm having so many messages coming through, and what many of my listeners are saying is that we all want to try and calm things down, and we don't want our sort of behaviour and our language to tip into what could be described as extreme. But they are also making the point that the language and the behaviour and the conduct of senior politicians is very important as well, in terms of sending signals out to the public. What do you think about that? How important is it for political leaders of all parties, isn't just picking on one party, of all parties and people with influence, to, if they start using extremist language, does that encourage citizens to do the same?
I'd be very wary about giving advice to anyone, politicians or newspapers or whoever, as to how they deal with these really, really difficult debates. I mean, there's no doubt about it that what is going on in Israel and Gaza arouses really, really profound emotions. And I wouldn't want to dictate how it should be done. I think that what I would say is that there comes a point at which it's no longer acceptable if threats of violence are being used. And the thing that I have in my mind, and I've got no idea if the Prime Minister had this in mind, is what happened in America on the 6th of January, where people who felt very, very passionate about something, which is fine, decided they were going to take it into their own hands and try and actually undermine and destroy and occupy democracy. So my concern is really at the fringes, and I would be cautious about trying to say to people how they should carry out the debate. In general, democracy is a very good thing and allows us, even polarized people, to argue, as long as we don't use threats, as long as MPs ultimately feel safe to represent their constituents and to make decisions, in good conscience.
And do you think the protest should still go ahead, Jonathan? Do you think people should still be allowed to protest on Gaza?
Yes.
Okay. Look, that was a really interesting conversation. My huge thanks to both Jonathan Hall, KC, he's the independent reviewer on terror legislation, and to Ali Milani, who is chair of the Labour Muslim Network.